Ace Frehley set down his guitar on stage, turned to Eric Clapton, and asked quietly, "Can I borrow yours?" After that, no one in the arena breathed. The year was 1978. Madison Square Garden. A charity concert that had brought together names that rarely shared the same stage. Rock royalty. Blues legends. Guitar gods who normally existed in their own orbits, suddenly pulled into the same gravitational field for one night. Ace Frehley wasn't supposed to be there. Kiss was touring. The schedule was brutal. But the organizers had called, and Gene Simmons had agreed they'd send someone. Good publicity, Gene had said. Ace had volunteered. Not for publicity. Not for exposure. He just wanted to play. He'd arrived at the venue alone. No makeup. No costume. Just Ace in jeans and a t-shirt, carrying his guitar case, walking through the backstage corridors like any session musician showing up for work. The other guitarists were already there. Jeff Beck tuning in a corner. Jimmy Page talking with a sound engineer. And Eric Clapton, sitting on an equipment case, his Stratocaster resting across his lap, his eyes distant in that way musicians get when they're running through songs in their head. Ace found a quiet spot near the wall. Set down his case. Opened it. His custom Les Paul gleamed under the fluorescent backstage lights. He built parts of it himself, modified the pickups, adjusted the action until it felt like an extension of his hands. A stagehand walked past, saw him sitting there. "You're the guy from Kiss, right? The spaceman?" Ace nodded. "Cool makeup. I'm not wearing any." The stagehand looked confused, then moved on. That was the thing about being in Kiss. People saw the costume, the pyrotechnics, the theatrics. They saw a show, a character. They didn't see the player. And most of the time, Ace preferred it that way. Less talk. More music. But tonight felt different. Tonight he was surrounded by players whose faces people knew. Whose names appeared on album covers without costume or gimmick. Players who were respected not for spectacle but for skill. And Ace could feel it in the way some of them looked at him. Or didn't look at him. The polite nods. The absence of conversation. He was the showman in a room full of musicians. He didn't defend himself. He never did. The concert began. Each guitarist got their segment. Jeff Beck opened with something fluid and impossible. Jimmy Page followed with a blues that bent notes until they wept. Eric Clapton played with that signature restraint that somehow said more than 1,000 notes ever could. Then it was Ace's turn. He walked onto the stage. No introduction beyond his name. The crowd recognized him. Some cheered, some seemed curious, waiting to see what the guy from the makeup band could do without the costume. Ace plugged in. Adjusted his amp. The arena was massive. 20,000 people. Most of them had probably never seen him without the silver paint and the platform boots. He started playing. Not fast. Not flashy. Just clean. A blues progression that any serious player would recognize. Standard. Foundational. The kind of thing you learned early and never forgot because it taught you everything you needed to know about feel. The notes hung in the air. Clear. Precise. No distortion to hide behind. No effects to dress it up. Just the guitar and the amplifier and his fingers. He played through the progression once. Twice. Building. Not showing off. Just building. And then his amplifier cut out. Complete silence. Ace stopped playing. The guitar was still in his hands, but no sound came out. He looked down at his cable. Checked the connection. Everything was plugged in. He tapped the amp with his foot. Nothing. The crowd murmured. Technical difficulties. It happens. Backstage, a sound engineer was already running toward the stage with a replacement amp. But it would take time. 60 seconds. Maybe 90. 60 seconds of silence on a stage in front of 20,000 people feels like an hour. Ace stood there. Guitar in his hands. Waiting. He didn't pace. Didn't gesture frantically to the tech crew. Didn't make jokes to fill the silence. He just stood there, patient, like he'd wait all night if he had to. That's when Eric Clapton walked onto the stage. He was carrying his Stratocaster. The same guitar he'd played during his set. The guitar that had produced some of the most iconic blues sounds in rock history. Clapton stopped a few feet from Ace. The crowd noise faded, sensing something happening. Clapton looked at Ace's dead amplifier, then at Ace. "Seems like you've got a problem," Clapton said. His voice was quiet, conversational, like they were alone instead of on stage in front of thousands. Ace nodded. "Amp died." "They're bringing you another one?" "Yeah. Be a minute." Clapton looked at his own guitar, then back at Ace. His expression was unreadable. Then he said, "You could borrow mine. If you want." The arena went completely silent. Ace didn't defend himself. He never did. Backstage, Jimmy Page had stopped mid-conversation. Beck had put down his drink. Every musician in the building understood what had just happened. Eric Clapton didn't lend his guitar to people. It wasn't about ego. It was about trust. A guitar is an extension of the player. It's adjusted to specific preferences: string height, neck curve, pickup position. Lending it meant trusting someone to understand that. Trusting their touch. Their respect. And he just offered it to Ace Frehley. The guy from Kiss. The showman. The one in the costume. Except there was no costume tonight. Just a player with a dead amplifier and 60 seconds of silence. Ace looked at the Stratocaster. Then at Clapton. "You sure?" "Only if you want to." Ace set down his Les Paul carefully, leaning it against his dead amp. He took the Stratocaster from Clapton's hands. The weight was different. The balance. The neck had a different feel. It wasn't his instrument. He slung the strap over his shoulder. Tested the weight. Ran his thumb over the strings. Clapton's setup was lower action than Ace preferred. The pickups were hotter. Different voice entirely. Clapton stepped back, off to the side of the stage, arms crossed, watching. The house lights dimmed slightly. Someone in the sound booth had made a decision: let this play out. Ace positioned his fingers on the fretboard. Looked out at the audience. Then down at the Stratocaster. And he started to play. Not the blues progression he'd been playing before. Something else. Something older. A cream riff. One of Clapton's own songs. A choice that could have been seen as showing off or paying tribute, depending on how he played it. Ace played it the second way. He didn't try to replicate Clapton's tone or style. He played it his way, cleaner, more precise, with subtle variations that showed he knew the original but wasn't trying to copy it. He was interpreting it. Having a conversation with it. The crowd started to respond. A murmur of recognition. Some applause building. Then Ace shifted. Moved into improvisation. Still respecting the Stratocaster's voice, but now showing what he could do with it. Bends that sang. Runs that flowed. Nothing excessive. Nothing to prove a point. Just playing. Playing the way you play when you forget the audience exists. When it's just you and the instrument and the sound you're trying to create. Subscribe and leave a comment, because some moments only make sense when we remember them together. Backstage, someone who'd worked with Kiss on their tours was watching on a monitor. "Jesus," he said to no one in particular. "I've never heard him play like that." Beck, standing nearby, shook his head. "That's because you've never heard him play without the explosions." On stage, Ace continued. 3 minutes became 5. 5 became 7. Clapton hadn't moved. He stood at the side of the stage, arms still crossed, but his expression had changed. The polite neutrality had shifted into something else. Recognition. The look one craftsman gives another when they see the real work behind the product. Finally, Ace brought it down. Let the improvisation resolve back into something melodic and simple. Then stopped. The final note hung in the air, sustained, then faded. The arena erupted. Not polite applause. Real applause. The kind that acknowledges something unexpected just happened. Ace unstrapped the Stratocaster. Walked over to Clapton. Handed it back. "Thank you," Ace said quietly. Clapton took his guitar. Looked at it. Looked at Ace. "Your amp should be working now." "Yeah. But you didn't need it, did you?" Ace didn't answer. "Didn't need to." Clapton extended his hand. Ace shook it. The handshake lasted 2 seconds. No words. Just acknowledgement. Then Clapton walked off stage, and Ace went back to his Les Paul, which was now plugged into the replacement amplifier the tech crew had brought out. But he didn't start playing again. His set was over. He'd said everything he needed to say. As he walked off stage, passing through the backstage area, some of the other musicians nodded to him differently than before. Not the polite recognition of a celebrity. The quiet acknowledgement of someone who'd just proven they belonged. Away from the spotlight, Ace made a choice no one expected. After the concert, there was the usual post-show reception. Music industry people. Donors. Press. The guitarists who'd performed were expected to make an appearance, shake some hands, take some photos. Ace didn't go. He found his guitar case, packed up his Les Paul, and headed for the exit. He was halfway down the back corridor when he heard footsteps behind him. "Leaving already?" Ace turned. Eric Clapton was standing there, his Stratocaster case in hand. "Yeah. Got a flight in a few hours." Clapton nodded. "Back to the rock and roll circus?" It could have been an insult. Coming from most people, it would have been. But Clapton's tone was neutral. A simple question. "Back to work," Ace said. They stood there for a moment. 2 men in an empty corridor. No audience. No cameras. "You know," Clapton said. "I've seen Kiss. On TV. The whole show. Fire and blood and all that." Ace waited. "I always wondered if there was a player under all that. Or if it was just spectacle. And now?" Clapton smiled slightly. "Now I know there's a player who chooses spectacle." "That's different." "How?" "Because choosing to do something people won't respect takes more confidence than doing something they will." Ace didn't respond. Clapton shifted his guitar case to his other hand. "Tonight," Clapton continued, "when your amp died, you could have walked off. Let them fix it. Come back. No one would have thought less of you. I didn't walk off. No. You stood there. Quiet. Like you'd wait all night if you had to. That's when I knew." "Knew what?" "That the player I'd heard about was real. That the rumors from session guys who'd worked with you were true. That under all that makeup." Clapton paused. "There's someone who doesn't need to prove anything. But will if you give him the chance." Ace felt something shift in his chest. Not validation. He'd never needed that from anyone. But recognition. From someone who understood what it meant to be reduced to an image while the work underneath went unseen. "Your guitar," Ace said. "Why'd you offer it?" Clapton considered the question. "Because I wanted to see what you'd do with it. Whether you'd try to show off. Try to prove you could play like me. Try to make a statement. And? You didn't do any of that. You just played. Honestly. With respect for the instrument and the moment. That's rarer than you'd think." They shook hands again. Longer this time. "If you ever want to play together," Clapton said. "Without the makeup, without the show, just play. You know where to find me." Ace nodded. "Same." Then Clapton turned and walked back toward the reception. Ace continued toward the exit. He didn't tell anyone about the conversation. Didn't mention it in interviews. Didn't use it to prove anything. That wasn't his way. Years later, a journalist asked Eric Clapton about that night at Madison Square Garden. About the charity concert. About lending his guitar. Clapton's answer was simple. "I learned something that night. I learned that the quietest players are often the most confident. Ace Frehley didn't need to tell anyone he could play. He just needed a working amplifier. Or someone else's guitar. Didn't matter to him. The sound was already in his hands. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. The Stratocaster Clapton played that night still exists. He kept it. Never sold it. And sometimes, when people ask about it, he tells them about the night the guy from Kiss borrowed it, and reminded him that skill doesn't need a costume. And respect doesn't need volume. Ace Frehley went back to Kiss. Back to the makeup. Back to the fire, and the spectacle. Because he chose to. Not because he had to. And that choice made all the difference.